Disclaimer: The Minority Report podcast by Mike V. Minor. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are mine and mine only, and do not reflect those of any affiliated individuals, organizations, or employers. This content is for entertainment and informational purposes only, so listen with an open mind. And if you don't agree, that's cool too.
All year, we've been arguing about the wrong things. Left versus right. Republicans versus Democrats. This politician versus that politician. But I think something deeper has been happening. And the truth is, you've been watching the wrong thing. Because the cycle we keep calling progress might not be progress at all. It might be pressure. And pressure does something to systems. Pressure reshapes them. Pressure reorganizes them. Pressure replaces them. And that pattern shows up everywhere, in families, in communities, in economies, in nations. And once you see the pattern, you stop watching the argument, you start watching the structure. And when you start watching the structure, you realize something very uncomfortable. Power is temporary, but precedent isn't. What's good, y'all, man? Before we even get into this recap, I just want to first and foremost say thank you, man. If you watched a clip, if you watched a full episode, if you debated with me, if you disagreed with me, respectfully, I appreciate you. All right? Make sure you do me the favor, subscribe, comment, share. Make sure you follow all that because this conversation is still growing. Now, originally, this episode was supposed to come out on the 1st of March, right? I had every intention of recording it. I had the pillars mapped out. I had the arguments. I had the ideas, but something about it just didn't sit right with me. It felt unfinished, and I really couldn't explain why at the time. Part of it was life. I've been busy. I've been building things. I've been at work. I've been working on projects, but the bigger reason was something deeper. It just didn't resonate just yet. It felt like something in the world hadn't revealed itself. Well, at least not yet. And then suddenly, everything started moving again. Global tension started building. Political discourse started heating back up. The State of the Union happened. And I started to realize something, right? A lot of the patterns we talked about this season were starting to play out in real time. And that's when I realized why this episode needed more time. Because this season recap isn't just a highlight reel, it's a reflection. It's just a lot of stuff that's going on in this world, and I just felt the need to talk about it, man. I just want to kind of put my own content out there, and I hope that you guys will, find this fun, and you guys will find this inviting. You guys will value my point of view. Now, some of y'all also noticed I went a little quiet for a minute, right? During Black History Month, I made a decision. For the entire month, I wasn't going to argue with any black people. I would respectfully decline any arguments. I could have hearty debates and everything, but as far as arguing, it wasn't going to happen, all right? Now, it wasn't because I didn't want conversations, but it was because sometimes solidarity is more important than spectacle. I would debate, I would discuss, but I refused to argue. And during that month, a lot of people tried to pull me into arguments anyway online, all right? Shots were taken, provocations were thrown, and I had to keep catching myself. The internet gave people a microphone, but it didn't give them the reason to use it responsibly. People say wild stuff online that they'll never say in person. There's stuff that people will say, they'd be like, oh yeah, shut your mouth. There was really only one time I stepped into something close to an argument. And even then, it wasn't really about ideology. It was about lineage. And the point that was being made deserved to be protected. That's why the fractures turn inward. Rich versus poor, respectable versus ghetto, FBA versus immigrant, get over slavery versus everything is slavery. These aren't causes, they're pressure leaks from a wound that never closed. But what that whole experience showed me was something important about debate culture. Social media is the only place you can lose an argument and change your profile pic and come back and say, I'm undefeated. When I came back and started jumping into conversations again, panels, discussions, debates, I realized something had changed for me. There were people I used to feel excited to debate, but once the conversations actually started, I realized something else. All right? Some people weren't trying to understand me. They were trying to defeat me, to conquer me, to win the moment. Both sides are too busy trying to win the crowd. But democracy isn't supposed to be a cage match. It's supposed to be a negotiation. Messy, painful, sometimes ugly, but real. And that's when I realized something about myself. My goal in these conversations has never been to win. My goal has always been clarity, truth, understanding. If I'm wrong, I'll concede. If someone else makes a strong point, I'll acknowledge it. But because debate to me is an exchange of ideas. When did we start confusing retaliation for righteousness? Everybody wants to clap back. Nobody wants to sit down. But that's not how everybody else sees it. And that realization forced me to step back and ask a bigger question. Why am I even doing this? And the answer hit me very clearly. This podcast isn't just content. It's a time capsule. This is something I'm leaving for my kids so that one day they can look back and understand how their father thought, why he stood where he stood, why he refused to join tribes, why he questioned power on both sides. I want them to inherit discernment, not outrage. They do watch this. I hope they watch this. Hopefully they're watching they daddy. I'm not here to entertain one side or the other. I'm not blue team and I'm not red team. I'm not chasing engagement. I'm chasing clarity. And if other people find value in these conversations, if it helps someone think more clearly, that's beautiful. But the real audience is the future. And while all of this was happening, I've also been building something else. So some of y'all already know I've been working on an app, right? I'm working on two major apps. I'll talk more about that later on. It's called Donnie. And what excites me about it is that it doesn't care about ideology, right? And just to give you proof, this is my little burner test phone, and here it is. You guys probably can't see much of it, and it's not really much to see, but it's getting somewhere, man. It's pretty cool. So anyways, it doesn't care if you're a Democrat or Republican. It doesn't care about your race, your background, your income. It just cares about doing its job, solving problems, helping people organize their lives. Because sometimes the best systems are the ones that don't care about the argument. They just care about the function. And that idea actually connects directly to this season, because all year we've been arguing about politics. I'm here to remind you both teams are playing us like we're the crowd. But the real story hasn't been politics. The real story has been structure. And that's what this recap is about. But before we get into it, I have to admit something to y'all, all right? I've been wrestling with the question, a real one. I've been asking myself, is this the end of this chapter? Was this whole season the whole capsule? Or am I done with this? Or is there another season of the Minority Report? Honestly, I don't really have that answer just yet. But maybe, just maybe, by the time we get to the end of this episode, we'll figure it out. There's actually one more thing that really made me stop and think before recording this episode. All right. The last post that I put up here on TikTok, it was about something I talked about at the end of the last episode, right? What I've been reading about and learning about and everything was, about foundational Black Americans and reparations. The whole commentary was about the idea of unresolved debts between societies. And I connected that idea to the conversation about reparations. Now, here's the interesting part. I never gave a dollar amount. I never said anyone should pay this much or that much. All I did was point out something very simple. Reparations aren't about guilt. They're about unresolved accounts. If you own human beings or inherited wealth directly tied to that ownership, if your state built infrastructure, power, or prosperity on forced labor, if your institution insured bodies, financed plantations, moved goods, or protected the system, that account was never settled. That was the entire point. But the reaction to that post was fascinating because almost every comment I received focused on something I never said. People started arguing about dollar amounts and about bringing up Irish slavery. People started talking completely about different historical debates, and it just was like I was like, what the heck is going on? And I realized something. Almost nobody was responding to the point I actually made. They were responding to the version of the argument they were already prepared to fight. And I'll be honest, part of me got curious, not out of pettiness, but just out of curiosity. So I started clicking through some of these profiles, leaving those comments, all right? And what I noticed was interesting. A good number of them have very strong right-leaning rhetoric in their profiles. Trump support, MAGA slogans, conservative political messaging. If Republicans want to prove they're not racist, then stop defining racism by your terms. Now, I want to be very clear about something. I am not saying every conservative believes that, and I'm not saying this to create a divide, but I did find it interesting that the loudest reaction to that post came from one particular political lane. Maybe it was a hashtag. I don't know. And what that showed me wasn't who was right or wrong. It showed me something deeper about the moment that we're living in, right? People aren't actually listening to arguments anymore. They're reacting to identities. They're reacting to triggers. They're reacting to narratives they already decided were true or were false. And that realization brought me right back to the bigger question I've been wrestling with this entire season. Are we actually having conversations, or are we just performing arguments? I haven't had to conform to what other people are saying or other people are doing. I don't have to be argumentative all the time. And if we're just performing arguments, then maybe we've been watching the wrong thing this whole entire time. Because the real story isn't the argument. The real story is the structure behind it. And I believe that the majority of not just Americans, but people in the world, they just look for peace and balance. And we're being pulled. So let's take a look back at season 1. Because the cycle we keep calling progress might actually be something completely different. I broke down my last season into 4 pillars. Pillar 1 was family. Pressure always shows up at home first. We talked about masculinity. Then we get to the idea that benefiting from patriarchy equals that you're evil. I'm a man, but that doesn't make me a monster. Provision versus presence. Money's not the same as safety. Safety ain't the same as influence or privilege. Burnout culture, survival culture, trauma mistaken for personality. We cheer when our champions win and we boo when they fall. We talked about how families don't collapse overnight. They shift slowly. Expectations change. Roles change. Stability weakens quietly. So the real question isn't how do we make it equal? It's what mix are we willing to live with? And here's the thing I kept noticing. When pressure increases, control increases. Voices get louder. Patience gets thinner. Distance grows and resistance forms. See, history doesn't repeat because people forget. It repeats because unfinished business keeps leaking forward. That's not politics, that's structure. Because systems under pressure reorganize homes, communities, countries. So that brings me to pillar 2, money. We talked about incentives because incentives don't care about speeches. Timing matters, man. Remember, most policies don't even show effects for I think they say it's 18 months for you to really see stuff happening. And by the time the truth comes out, politicians are already running their campaign on the next new slogan. Tariffs, shut down theater, tax codes, Pentagon audits, housing inflation, ownership compounding, monopoly. Corporations brag about record profits while giving workers gas money and a pat on the back. And the same pattern that kept appearing was that incentives drift behavior. Behavior drifts morality. Morality drifts policy. And eventually the structure changes. America has always used incentive systems. Enslavement, sharecropping, redlining was an incentive system. Different eras, same logic. Extract value without transferring ownership. Because systems follow incentives more faithfully than they follow ideals. And that's hypocrisy so rich, it should be in the Forbes list. That brought me to pillar 3. We started talking about communities, right? Protest, tokenism, spectacle politics, the American Coliseum, where outrage becomes entertainment and division becomes profitable. One's a silent film, the other's bad reality TV. Democrats are in the green room arguing about who gets the mic, while Republicans are out in front arguing about what the truth even is. And everybody wants to be right, but nobody wants to get right. And the moment division becomes profitable, systems start to feed it. Communities fracture, trust weakens, coalitions collapse. If wealth compounds, exclusion compounds too. A system that only rewards the ultra ambitious and the ultra desperate becomes hostile to everyone in the middle. And eventually, even the winners feel it. And the same pattern keeps repeating. Pressure, control, resistance, transition. The right weaponizes it, the left romanticizes it, and neither side actually explains it. So here we are at pillar 4, global power. We had to zoom out. Iran, Israel, North Korea, South America, trade leverage, military posture, historical coups, foreign policy branding. Provoke, profit, repeat. Fail upward, cash out anyway. We turn failures into headlines, and we turn money into morals, and then we call it leadership. And one idea kept showing up again and again. Precedent. Because power doesn't just act. Power remembers what it normalized before. And once something becomes precedent, it becomes easier the next time. And it's not because everybody decided it. It's because we told them we would do it. Which leads to the most dangerous misunderstanding in politics. People think power lasts forever, and it doesn't. But precedent lasts generations. Who decides guilt internationally? Who enforces it? Who audits the enforcer? If indictments justify invasions, every superpower just learned the rule. So that brings me to when the pattern became impossible to ignore, right? It's not politics. It's a pattern, all right? Scale 1. In a home, when fear shows up, power grows, rules tighten, voices rise, resistance forms, and eventually the structure shifts. But that kind of pride, the pride that can't handle correction, that's the same pride that built empires and burned them down. Scale 2. In communities, when fear shows up, authority expands, more control, more posture, more protest, more fracture, and eventually leadership changes. Governing through fear is weakness, and the moment fear becomes policy, the scarecrow wins. When people lose faith in systems, morality becomes a coin flip. Scale 3. In nations, when fear shows up, power centralizes. Emergency powers, military posture, trade leverage, and resistance organizes. Alliances shift. Empires transition. We keep blaming each other, left, right, black, white, gay, straight, immigrant, native, and yet nobody wants to lead by example. So let me lead by saying this. You can't lead the free world if you're still a prisoner to your pride. And that's when the universal pattern becomes clear. Every time fear shows up, power grows. Every time power grows, resistance grows. And when resistance becomes just as organized as power, systems transition. Not because someone planned it, but because that's what pressure does to systems. And when one side lives in delusion and the other lives in hypocrisy, the public loses trust in the entire system. That's how norms collapse, not all at once, but through justification. And once the door is open, it doesn't matter who you voted for when it swings back. So this season, we weren't really watching left versus right. We were watching pressure. We were watching incentives. We were watching precedent. And the cycle we keep calling progress might actually just be pressure reshaping the structure. Power is temporary, but precedent isn't. And if you've been watching parties instead of patterns, if you've been cheering the fight instead of questioning the structure, then you've been watching the wrong thing. Before I go, if the truth makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's not the truth that needs changing. Even though history doesn't repeat because we're incapable of learning. And my people's trauma isn't a history book to close. It's bloodlines still paying interest, which is why tokens are useful, tokens are visible, but tokens are never valued. And democracy becomes collateral damage when fear governs faster than patience. We must remember that. Even not choosing is a choice. Therefore, we need accountability up, compassion out. Because America doesn't need more gladiators. It needs fewer arenas. To realize that not working out isn't the end of the story, which allows us to mourn what you've lost, then build what they can't steal. Knowing forgiveness frees you, and retaliation just keeps you shackled to the same fire you say you're trying to escape. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing, but sometimes nothing is exactly what ends the fire. But before we go, earlier in this episode, I told you I've been wrestling with the question whether this was the end of this chapter for me, right? Whether this recap closed the capsule. And after thinking about it, after reflecting on everything we've talked about this season, I realized something. The conversation isn't finished. The patterns we've been watching, they're still unfolding. So I guess there's only 3 things left to say. Once again, I go by the name of Mike B. Minor. This is the Minority Report, where the center ain't sexy, but it just might save us. I'll see you guys in season 2 of the Minority Report, and the mic has been dropped.
I have Democrats coming down saying you're an idiot. I have Republicans coming over and saying you're an idiot. And I'm like, well, both of you guys are saying that, then that means I'm actually doing something right. That means I'm being neutral. All right, that could also mean I'm an idiot. Hopefully you guys think I'm level-headed. Some people think I'm crazy.